It's a great pleasure for me to be able to welcome Massimo Franco to the ISF, not least because he has had an association with us at the Institute for at least 10 years, I think. He's a member of the Institute, and he's also, on 2 occasions over the last 10 years, been a visiting researcher at the ISS, and many of you will no doubt have read some of his articles in our journal, Survival. Massimo's day job, if I can put it this way, is to be one of Italy's leading commentators on Italian politics. He writes for the Corriere della Sera, and he's also associated with a very highly regarded biography of the 7-time Prime Minister of Italy, Andreotti, which came out in 2010. But I suppose a prominent sideline of his career has been a continuing interest and expertise in matters regarding the Vatican, and there's been a tremendous amount of written output in terms of articles and books on that over the years, including such books as Parallel Empires, which explored the relationship between the United States and the Vatican over a couple of hundred years. His most recent book is Vaticano secondo Francesco. In English, I gather that's the Vatican according to Francis. I suppose most of us, when we're thinking about Vatican affairs right now, are struck by the arrival of the new Pope and some of the internal challenges with which he is dealing. But perhaps one of the aspects that's less well understood, if we can put it this way, the geopolitics of the Vatican, the foreign policy of the Vatican, and the ways in which that may be undergoing some change. So that is what Massimo is principally going to be talking about today. I should say that we're also very pleased to have the Papal Nuncio, Monsignor Antonio Menini here, and if I may impose on you, perhaps after Massimo has made some remarks of 15 minutes or so, if you would like to make any observations, those would be very gratefully received. So, Massimo, welcome again, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for this invitation, which is very pleasing to me, also because I think that, as Adam knows very well, it's quite unusual that at the Institute we discuss of papacy. That means that with this Pope, a major change is coming on the international stage, and I would say also on security and strategy. So let me thank Adam Ward and the Institute for this invitation. I'm a bit intimidated because there is the Papal Nuncius, who is an expert in diplomacy, so he was in Moscow for many years. And as we see in these months, there is a double crisis in Syria and in Ukraine, in which the role of Vladimir Putin is very strong and very controversial. I think that we have entitled this discussion "The Pope Between Obama and Putin" because this is a challenge in which all the paradigms and all the divides, the traditional divides, West, East, are very much disputed. This Pope Francis is a real novelty because he's in a way a post-Cold War Pope, and he doesn't accept the divide between East and West. That's why he opposes very strongly the fact that there might be a new Cold War stemming from the crisis in Ukraine, because I think that this Pope doesn't consider the traditional borders of the Cold War, and I would say that he doesn't recognize any border at all. He's a Latin American, which means that he's an American. So we would say that he comes from the extreme West, but he's more a Southerner than a Western. And he doesn't view America and the United States as the beacon of freedom for him. He's a Latin American, so he never visited the United States. He doesn't speak English. And the task he was given by the conclave was to re-evangelize, in a way, Europe and Rome with a Latin American model trying to conquer the Vatican. We have 2 starting points to analyze this shift of the Holy See's foreign policy. The first is Syria, the second is Ukraine. And we can see a very striking difference in the approach of the Pope. On Syria, the Pope was very outspoken. He was very much against the war. He understood that the key to peace was Putin and not Obama, and opposing very openly the war. I think he interpreted the mood of Western public opinion, and we had an example in Great Britain where the parliament opposed the intervention. And secondly, I think that the Pope knows very well that a Balkanization of the Middle East, which is called by the Vatican, not by chance, Near East, means that the role of Christian minorities would be further diminished and destroy the role of bridge between different cultures that Christian minorities have always had in that region of the world. Second, I also think that the Vatican, and this Pope in particular, knows that if there is unipolarism, the soft power of the Vatican can play not a great role. So, as many actors there are, as much the Vatican can influence international politics and make its soft power matter. So this is the two reasons why the Pope looked for the support of Putin and obtained it. He knew that Putin had a very strong hard power in the region for military, family, and economic reasons, and that Putin might help Christian minorities much more than the West at the moment, because the West at the moment doesn't have any major role due to the strategy on the so-called Arab Springs, to the war in Iraq, and so on. But there is also a second reason for this de facto alliance between Putin and Pope Francis. For the first time, Russia doesn't view a pope as a sort of religious and moral arm of the Atlantic Alliance. So, if we see this pope compared to his predecessors, like a Pope, John Paul II, and a German, Benedict XVI, this pope is not a NATO pope. Maybe that it is an exaggeration defining his predecessors as NATO popes, but there was an objective alliance. They were grateful to the United States, they were anti-communist, so there was this long shadow of the Cold War coming ahead. That's why the Pope was very much welcomed by Putin. And the Pope welcomes Putin as a sort of Christian Tsar, defending the role of Christian minorities, not just of Orthodox, but of Catholics as well. And we must consider that there is a very unnoted alliance as well between the Vatican and Russia, which is the defense of moral values. It can appear quite paradoxical because Putin is quite a rough and ready leader, and overall inside the borders of his country, and as we have seen in Ukraine, is quite brutal. But all his narrative on normal families, against homosexuality, and his critics to a secularized Europe meet many of the words said or not said but made understood by the Vatican on moral values. So this is a second point which is often undervalued but which matters. If we come to Ukraine, we see that the Vatican had a very different approach. Not an outspoken approach, but a very cautious one. Why this difference? Just because in Ukraine we see that the Vatican foresees the risk of a new Cold War, which is not just a military one, but a religious one. So all the attempts to smooth the relations with Orthodox might be put in danger by a clash between Europe and the US and Russia, and between the Orthodox community and Catholic minorities. So the Pope just spent, I think, a few words, a very cautious words about the crisis, while he let Archbishop of Kiev, Sovchuk, speaking very openly against Russia. And we must consider that this Archbishop is very well known by the Pope because he spent 3 years in Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires is the cradle of interfaith relations as the Pope imagines them. So this man was the man charged to say what the Pope and the Vatican officially couldn't say. But this, of course, affects the relation between the Pope, Europe, and the US. So what is the problem now? I think that the Vatican doesn't share the view of a new Cold War. It doesn't want it, but it also thinks that it might be a fabricated one, because Russia is not the Soviet Union, the US is not the US of the past, and overall Europe is not Europe of the past. Europe is very fragmented about Russia, and there are very divergent interests between single countries. Second, I think that the Pope and the Vatican don't want to be squeezed again on the Western side. If you talk with the Pope's inner circle, they'll tell you very clearly that they don't want to be associated with the West when there is a war in sight or there is a very strong military struggle in sight, because the Pope doesn't share this view and doesn't want a Cold War to be revived. So this explains why on Ukraine the Pope was very cautious. And that brings us to talk about, more in general, relations between the Pope and Obama. As you know, Obama was received by the Pope in Rome some weeks ago, and what was quite clear was that for Obama it was a key meeting, while for the Pope it was just the last powerful man coming to visit him. And what is quite striking is that while Obama seemed very pleased and enthusiastic about the meeting, the Pope was a bit cooler. So he wanted to make sure overall US bishops that he was not sharing Obama's views. And the communiqué, the note released by the Vatican after the meeting, underlined not just the common ground which exists, because it exists on poverty, on immigration, on many things, but also all the issues dividing the Vatican from Obama and the Democrats. And the impression that we had in Rome was that at a certain point the Pope spoiled both the meeting with French President François Hollande and the meeting with Obama to refine his profile. Because in the last months we have seen that this Pope was very much praised when he took liberal positions, while when he talked in a very traditional way, there was a silent reaction of the mass media. So my impression is the Pope didn't like to be portrayed as a liberal Pope, and he spoiled these occasions to reshape his profile and to say to the people, listen, it's a problem of emphasis, not of doctrine. So with Obama, the Vatican said quite openly that there were still dividing issues. And we must consider that depends on the fact that as far as the Pope doesn't know the United States, and that his big electors in the conclave were American cardinals overall, he wanted to show to US cardinals and bishops that he was with them, not with Obama. So this is something which has not been very much underlined, but which is quite important to understand what's going on. So what we are viewing now is a Pope who is very popular, who is winning worldwide in terms of popularity, of respect, because we must think that just 1 year ago, the Vatican was considered a sort of global culprit for the scandals of pedophilia, for the IOR problems, and so on, Vatileaks and so on. Now, this is, well, we don't say over, but anyway, it has been put in a corner. And this Pope is very much respected and, again, an international actor. The big question mark is if this Pope is winning in Rome, because from Rome we receive more controversial signals. I don't think that he has already won, and I'm not sure that he's winning, because resistances are very strong, because the Pope hasn't a number of advisors who can inform him properly about the situation in Rome. Maybe then Monsignor Menini might be a major help for him, because he's Roman. He's Roman, and he knows very well not just Moscow or the UK, but the Roman Curia as well. So we are still in a pontificate which has to give its real shape and its real potential. For the West, it is a challenge, I guess, because all the paradigms and categories are over, and this Pope moves in an unpredictable way on the international scene. But what I think is that this challenge might turn to be an opportunity if the West understands the new logics and the new dynamics of this papacy, because it will have influence on the international scene. And I also think that the way the Pope behaves let us understand better also how to behave with Putin, because I think that the West keeps a very traditional approach, while we must, for instance, we must ask ourselves why this time in Ukraine, about Crimea, Putin was not criticized by Mikhail Gorbachev. That is quite strange, because usually Gorbachev spoils any occasion to attack him. This time it didn't happen. Why? It means that the support of Russian public opinion to what Putin is doing is very strong. Last point, I also think that if the Pope doesn't win in Rome, he will not win worldwide, because I think that the crisis of the Vatican stemmed from the problems inside the Vatican governance, the Vatican government. So if it is not solved there, it will be very difficult to have a world projection without contradictions and without resistances and without very bad surprises.
Massimo, thank you very much indeed for that. Monsignor Menini, would you care to give an initial response?
First of all, I thank you very much, you, dear sir, and Massimo, for inviting me to this meeting. It's very interesting. I have finished to read the book of Massimo. That, for what concerns the book, I would like to underline only 2 or 3 points. Yes, when Massimo speaks or writes about the Federal Father decide to live in Santa Marta, underlines the dimension. I would say not of course it's been a revolution if we look to his predecessor who had been living only in the apostolic palace. But it is not a gesture or something made because of in order to meet the applause of people, but it would be first of all the sign of his disponibility to I am here in order to meet all who want to see me and so on. This is very important, the psychological picture of the present Holy Father. Secondly, I would say that I agree with Marshall when he said that if the Holy Father is not able to win Rome, his mission would be quite difficult or a little bit border. So But in any case, you see, we know that from the history that according to Tacitus, Tacitus was suggesting to Caesar that you should win abroad in Gallia in order to win in Rome. Possibly now the terms of the problem are changing. Coming, for example, going to the question of Ukraine, yes, as Massimo has underlined, we only see in these occasions be very prudent, very soft, facing the situation there. And that I would say that really in Ukraine, the existing borders are political borders, but are not ethnic or religious borders. But possibly there we could find the source of this problem. And as John Paul II said many times, given the fact that the President Holy Father doesn't want to be spoiled in order to build up a new Cold War, I think that we as Christians should underline more that really our faith couldn't, we couldn't be accept any new form of very tough nationalism. No? We have to recognize that on the both sides, on the Orthodox side and the Christian, Greek Catholic side, the nationalism is very strong. It's very, yes, so they can't imagine that they could work together. Yes, I met here also Archbishop Shevchuk last year, and I told him, you are a very young man, you have to work in order to build up bridge with the Alzheimer's. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. You are very young, so you have to work for this purpose. This is a great mission. And it is true what Massimo was saying about the moral role that Russia is playing in different international forums. Since many years, Russia, I would say, took the place which was of the American, possibly until 20-25 years. I am an eyewitness, for example, not only for what concerns this very actual, very item, the homosexual marriage and so on, but for example, since many years, Russia has been always against euthanasia, against the practice of experiments on embryos and so on. Then, in order to defend the role of the family in the society and so on. Of course, we have to help them. You see, that Massimo underlined the fact that especially Europe in this last crisis in Ukraine has been very divided from. But I think that we should support the idea of Miss Angela Merkel or our Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs, as it was the previous one, Mr. Bonini. We can't isolate Russia, not only because you see we have to avoid the risk to push Russia or Moscow in the arms of China. It would be a political question. No, we should be more aware of the values, cultural values that Russia can bring in order to shape a new Europe.
Okay. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. We'll now open up for questions and comments from other people. Maybe I can just start, Massimo, by encouraging you to describe for us who are the resistors, where is the resistance coming from in Rome, what is their agenda, what objectives do they have in mind?
Well, I think it is a problem of mentality much more than of personnel. I think that we must start from the resignation of Benedict XVI and from the conclave. Of course, the resignation of Benedict XVI was a traumatic gesture, which brought every position to zero inside the Vatican. And the conclave started with a clear point made by non-Italian and non-European cardinals. We don't want an Italian pope. We don't want a European pope, possibly. From that point on, everything happened because this pope is a very radical choice and a reaction to that gesture. So we can understand Francis without the failure, or anyway, the end in a very strange way after 7 centuries of Benedict XVI's papacy. So what's now? Now we are seeing a pope who is trying to destructure the Roman Curia and to create a new one with many, not just resistances, but contradictions as well. Because the impression is that the Pope is picking up people who are against the old mentality. But that is not true at all. Anyway, in some cases it doesn't happen because things are not just black and white, but there is a very large gray area inside the Vatican. And if we see, for instance, the outcome of all this reform of the IOR, there were cardinals who said that it had to be...
Vatican Bank.
Vatican Bank, sorry. Istituto Opere di Religione, Institute for Religious Works, which is considered the Bank of the Vatican, although it is not a bank in the traditional meaning. We see that the outcome is that the bank will be reformed, but it will remain there. And there has been a sort of duplication of the banking system because the APSA, which is a sort of central bank of the Vatican, will remain there also. So it means that we receive from Rome mixed signals, and that the Pope is trying very hard, but that resistances and problems are all there. There are interests which are very strong, and not everybody wants this interest to be touched and destroyed. Second, I think that the Pope has a major problem to understand a bit better how Rome works, what is the level of his advisors, and who are the right persons to advise him. So this is a big question mark, and I think that the Pope hasn't yet solved that, and the general approach to these radical reforms of the Pope, potential radical reforms, is a wait-and-see strategy of people waiting for him to make some mistakes and possibly say, you see, if you reform too much or if you reform without informing us, you might make major mistakes.
Yes, please. Could you just identify yourself as well, please?
Yes, my name is Nazanin Ansari. I'm a member here and also a journalist here in London. What is the role of the Jesuits in America? Has it improved with the new Pope? I know there was a meeting between the American Jesuits and the Pope soon after his selection. And also the issues dividing President Obama and the Pope, what are they?
Well, about the Jesuits, I report in the book a very strange episode. A Jesuit told me that the general of the Jesuits sent them a recommendation. Please do not recommend people to meet the Pope. So it means that the Jesuits don't want to appear too close to the Pope because they might be accused of to favor and to have a special relation with the Pope. So I think that with the Jesuit, the relation is very strict. But you must also consider that this Pope had a very tormented relations with the Jesuits. When he was in Buenos Aires, he was sent to exile for 22 months, I guess, to Cordoba, because he was not considered liberal enough. He was not considered enough pro the theology of liberation. He was an Orthodox, a Vatican conservative. So when sometimes we hear some American Republicans saying that he sells Marxist stuff, it's a nonsense. It's just because he has a different approach to America, to globalization. So I think that inside the Jesuit company, he has just the relations of a Jesuit who doesn't want the Jesuit to be too much far from what the Vatican thinks. This is the first thing. And we jump to America. I think that the divide is on moral values. The Vatican considers U.S. Democrats as a sort of American European left, which means very much secularized, very much anti-Catholic, and too much, well, I would say not religious in the meaning the Vatican thinks. And the paradox is that in the United States, most Catholics voted for Obama. So the Church suffers it very much because it knows that American Catholics think that moral values are also unemployment, immigration. So there is a continuous struggle between Republican bishops and Democratic bishops. The attempt of this Pope and of the U.S. Conference of Bishops is to eliminate this divide between Republican and Democratic bishops. But of course, I think that the Vatican today already looks at the U.S. after Obama, not with Obama, because they think that Obama already delivered what he had to deliver.
Glenn Evans, please.
Thank you. Glenn Evans, member of the Institute. If I may, I have two questions. The first one, at the outset, you said that in terms of military action versus Syria, the Pope had been very cautious. He took account of the fact that Western public opinion was opposed. Before the First and the Second Gulf Wars...
I didn't say that in Syria he was cautious. I said he was very outspoken in Syria. I said he was cautious on Ukraine.
I'm sorry, on Ukraine.
Sorry.
But before the First and Second Gulf War, the Pope always issued a statement on just war, according to fairly established principles. What I took from that remark, in Ukraine, was that in defining those, the Pope will also take account of where public opinion is going. Perhaps I drew too much as an inference. That was one question. Is that a factor when the Pope considers what is and is not a just war? And the second one was, I found absolutely fascinating when you said that the Russian moral values were in some sense beginning to replace those that had been those of the United States, as regards homosexuality and other matters. In the Anglo-Saxon world, in the UK for example, these are seen very much as a feature of human rights and equality. How does this new approach in the Vatican view human rights as a factor?
The first was about the just war, the concept of just war. My impression is, with this Pope, we are having a shift. I don't think that this Pope is considering the principle of a just war as his predecessors. For this Pope, war is always negative. And in fact, when he talked about war, about Syria, he was even a bit naive in my view, because he said that wars are used just to sell illegal weapons, which is, I think, something very popular but not very subtle to say. So it means that he has a principled opposition to war. So this is a major shift. It means war, we have seen in last years, doesn't solve problems. So don't propose us more wars overall. by the West because we cannot share this view and accept this solution. This is the first point. About human rights, I think that it's a contradiction because I think that in Russia human rights are not so much respected. So Putin is quite brutal and rough and ready when we go inside Russian borders. But I think that for the Vatican, the fact is that the Vatican is orphan of the Western support. Paradoxically, when there was all the crisis of the crucifix in Italy, when a Finnish Italian mother asked Europe to eliminate from public schoolrooms in Italy the crucifix, the Vatican was supported not by traditional big European countries like Germany or France or Spain or Great Britain, but by many Eastern countries, Russia included. And that was very astonishing to the Vatican. And it was also paradoxical because when there was communism, John Paul II said that after the end of communism, Christian and democratic Europe would re-evangelize for the former Soviet empire. With the crucifix crisis, the Vatican just saw the opposite, that Eastern Europe was helping the Vatican on an issue like the crucifix in public schoolrooms. So I think that for the Vatican it matters more than human rights in Russia. That's my impression.
Nomi Baryakov, please.
Thank you very much. Nomi Baryakov, Chatham House, and very much still a friend of the IISS. Massimo, thank you very much for a marvellous presentation. I just, in your book, you talk a little bit about the new consultative body, foreign policy body that Pope Francis has set up in eight sort of new advisors from different parts of the world. So I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit about the role of this new Vatican foreign policy body, and a little bit about their thinking, particularly about Syria and Iran.
Thank you. First of all, the so-said C8, Cardinal 8, which is a sort of ecclesiastic version of the G8 of lay countries, is the demonstration, I would say the confirmation of the end of a Eurocentric approach of the Vatican, because most of them are not European. There are 3 Latin Americans, including the Pope, 1 Australian, 1 Indian, 1 African, and then 2 Europeans, just 1 Italian. That means that the conclave was a sort of, we have the International Monetary Fund, which intervenes when some state, some country is going to fail economically. We can view this C8 as a sort of international religious fund going to save the Vatican from the risk of a moral failure. So this C8 is the way in which the world, the Catholic world as a whole, tries to elaborate the strategy of the Vatican for the next years with an implicit critic to Italy and to the Curia. But that doesn't mean that the Pope is going to share his decision power with this body, because I think that it's just a consulting body asked by the conclave, because it was the conclave to ask the Pope to create this body. I repeat, this doesn't mean that the Pope is sharing his decision-making process, because the Pope knows very well what power is. And sometimes he's accused to be unpredictable because he decides by himself very suddenly, and many people are frustrated and intimidated because they don't know who will be the next. About Syria and Iran, I think that one of the reasons why the Pope appeared to choose Putin is that he knows that Putin has a good relation with Iran as well. So the leverage of Russia in that area extends to Iran. And they know that they cannot solve the problems or anyway smooth the problems in that area without the help of Russia.
How do you think Putin sees the Pope? We've talked about how the Pope sees Putin.
Well, I was told that Putin was enthusiastic after meeting the Pope, because I think that first he considers him not an Atlanticist. Second, because he knows that he has very good relations with the Orthodox Church, relation that he improved when he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Third, because he knows that he wants peace and he needs peace in Syria and in the Middle East. Third, Putin is happy because he shares with the Pope the same point of view on Arab Springs, because both Russia and the Vatican think that they were a very ambiguous, contradictory, and eventually negative phenomenon. Because, first of all, the status quo granted by lay, although bloody tyrants, seems both to Russia and to the Holy See better than a revolution with Islamic elites coming to power, because they mean that they are going to persecute Christian minorities and they destabilize the status quo. Second, because I think that for different reasons, Putin for domestic reasons and the Pope for world reasons want the United States to be downgraded to a major global player, but not the only global player. So, for all these reasons, I think that Putin likes this Pope.
Okay. Ben Barry.
Hi, Ben.
Thank you. I wonder if you could say anything about how important Africa is in these calculations. You've covered many other areas where there are significant Catholic and Christian populations.
Well, I think that about Africa, African cardinals were among the voters of this Pope. But I think that at the moment, this Pope, as far as I understand, is very much focused on Middle East and Asia. Africa is something where Christianity, more than Catholicism, are growing. But I don't think that the Pope has a priority on Africa at this moment. My impression is that the Pope, in these very early months of his papacy, was overall focused on Rome, because he understood, and in some way he was forced to focus on Rome, because it's from there that he can start his world revolution of the Church. Yes, please.
Maybe, I don't know if it's interesting for the audience, the impact on Italian politics of the new Pope, and especially on foreign politics, and also on the background you mentioned of winning in Rome. Can you elaborate a bit on the relationship between the two sides of the Tiber?
Well, we are at a point zero in relations between this papacy and Italian politics, because I think that in Italy, political Catholicism is finished. Italians vote as they want. They are not at all influenced by the Church, but it is the consequence of a long period of secularization, luckily, of the Italian electorate. Second, I also think that this Pope doesn't want to be involved with Italian politics, not at all. And that the Italian Conference of Bishops is quite disoriented by this Pope, culturally. So I can't see any mutual influence between religion and politics at the moment in Italy. What there might be is that for different reasons, both Italy and the Pope doesn't want an open struggle with Russia. The Italian government for energy supplies problems. the Vatican for the reasons we have listed before.
Yes, please.
Francesco Marino, I'm a student at Kids College. You say that we cannot consider the Pope as an Atlanticist, but more as a Southern man. In this relation, how is the impact of the Pope with the government in Southern America? I know that he has now a good relationship with Cristina Kirchner in Argentina. I don't know, but at the same time, we can think about how those countries are usually not so in good relationship with the U.S. So it's
Yes.
an interesting web of relations.
You mean overall on Latin American governments? Yes. Well, what I was told is that in Argentina now there is a paradoxical situation because before becoming Pope, Archbishop Bergoglio was not so much considered. When I spoke to his friends in Buenos Aires as the director, the dean of the Universidad Católica Argentina, Victor Manuel Fernandez, and I asked him, Professor, what is the power network of Bergoglio here? What was it? He answered me. He answered me. But you know, Bergoglio was going to retire, so he had no power left. So it was a surprise. Everybody was jumping over his head, talking with other people in the Vatican. And the relation with the Kirchner was very bad. We must consider that in the first 48 hours after his elections, both the Argentinian television and Argentinian pro-government newspapers hit the Pope brutally, saying that it was a shame that he had been elected because he was an accomplice of the dictators. So it was a terrific and dreadful situation. Then after 48 hours, when they understood that most Argentinians were with the Pope, they changed completely their approach and said, yes, this is our Pope, and Cristina Kirchner rushed to Rome to greet him. But you must consider this Pope was considered the head of the moral opposition to the government in Argentina. And when Kirchner, Nestor, the husband of Cristina Kirchner, came to power, he asked to the counselor of the Archbishop to meet him for lunch and said, would you please ask the Archbishop to come to lunch to the Casa Rosada this afternoon? And the then Archbishop answered, no se hace así. It doesn't work like this. If you want to talk with me, you come to the cathedral. I don't come to your palace. That is very telling of what Bergoglio thinks of the Catholic power, of the Church's power. Paradoxically now, I was told that in Argentina there are too many expectations. They think that the Pope can solve the economic situation, that he can solve the political situation. Well, it's impossible. So he's not Jesus Christ. He cannot make miracles. So, and for the rest of Latin America, we can perceive the same mood. There are countries which think that this Pope can solve their problems, while I think that they exaggerate their expectations, because I think this Pope, of course, is very focused on Latin America, but his power is limited.
Please.
Ibrahim from Turkishan's Second Secretary. Thank you very much for everything. You mentioned about the popes and Putin's relation, how they see each other, and Pope's approach regarding the US. And also you mentioned the Kiev Church's position against Russia.
Yes.
In this regard, could you please also talk about how Pope sees the measures taken by EU and US against Russia, because these are not war. He is against absolutely war, but these are something different. What do you think?
I don't understand very well.
What is the Pope's view of the measures that the Americans and the Europeans have taken against Putin in light of the...
Oh, well, I think that he's not convinced that there are good sanctions. I think that what the Pope and the Holy See are trying to avoid is an escalation of the tensions between Europe, US, and Russia. So I think that we'll not hear much support of the Church, the Catholic Church, towards the sanctions, if they are tougher one towards Russia. I don't think so. I think that at the moment the Vatican is very eager to demonstrate that the identification with the West is not as total as it was in the past.
Well, Massimo, thank you very much indeed. Monsignor, thank you very much indeed. I'm tempted to ask you, if there wasn't a C8, but if there was an M1, what would the advice be that you would offer? But that's probably a topic for another session, which I hope that there will be before long. Could you all please join me for Massimo and thank you, Massimo. Thank you.